America is genocidally starving Cuba into the dark ages with an oil blockade. America has funded genocide on the Palestinians. America wants to veto the whole world with impunity, the United States, but doesn't want to be signatory to the International Court of Tribunals, the International Court of Law. So it seems to me that America wants their cake and eat it too. They want to be the world's sole superpower. They want to veto the whole world and every nation in it with impunity, but they don't want to recognize the international norms of the International Court of Law. And they refuse to let every nation on earth be permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So that's where America went wrong in the international community. How can you claim to be a world sole superpower and think that you have the sole prerogative to veto the whole world into the whims of your submissions by submitting the world to the whims of your power as a world sole superpower? That is global tyranny and undemocratic in the international realm, and in direct violations of international norms. So I want to reform the United Nations for that reason. Take example, Cuba, the economical embargoes on Cuba. Every nation on earth voted to raise the economical embargo. The only nation to object was America and Israel. While Israel's committing genocide on the Gaza Strip, direct, funded, and allied with the United States to commit atrocities on the Palestinian people, and then not to recognize Palestine as a country while they're being starved and slaughtered in the Gaza Strip. And now Netanyahu is committing genocide to move into the Lebanon and annex part of Lebanon. Trump threatened to annihilate their Iranian civilization. He threatened to destroy their desalination water, drinking water plant, insinuating that he would make them die of thirst by not having access to drinking water. To over 90 million populations of citizens in Iran. So America has become a land of tyranny, tyrannical rule over the world, hegemonically tyrannical. America doesn't want to recognize the United Nations Human Rights Organization, but they want to veto the whole world and every nation in it and subvert the whole world to the whims of America's sole world super status as a hegemonic global dominance. So when America wants to veto the whole world but doesn't want to recognize human rights for the whole world, when America wants to veto the whole world into submission and have total impunity, not to recognize international laws, not to recognize the international courts, not to recognize human rights on a global stage and then to be funding genocide on the Palestinians, and then to threaten to commit genocide on the Iranian government, to destroy their source of drinking water. For there will be mass starvations of Iranian populations of over 90 million people dying of thirst. These are tyrannical world soul superpower of America becoming a tyrant on the world stage. Not to let every nation on earth be set down in the United Nations Security Council as permanent members, with every nation on earth having their equal sovereign votes as permanent members. America is not willing to let the world be globally democratic. America wants to be a totalitarian dictatorial rule over the rest of the nations on earth, and not adhere to the will of the assemblies of all nations on earth. America is becoming a global dictatorial rule, totalitarian global rule, and I will not stand that type of undemocratic international norms. I stand against that. I condemn America for their tyranny of undemocratic global hegemony over the rest of the world. So what I am calling for the United Nations to reform, even if America tries to veto the whole world and every nation in it, then push America to the side. They don't have the authority to contradict this reform. This is all nations taking their rightful place permanently in the international community to become permanent members, unanimously, synchronizationally, simultaneously, to be sat at the table as permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. America doesn't get to pick winners and losers just to keep their monopoly going. And for America to threaten to tariff the whole world with 100% tariff and use starvation tactics like they're using in the Gaza Strip or in Cuba, or what they were threatening to do in Iran to starve them from drinking water, to annihilate their whole entire civilization of 90 million Iranian people to die of thirst. Those were the threats that were coming out of the White House. To starve the Cuban government into the dark ages by blocking oil from entering their countries. These are economical genocide tactics of mass violations of human rights. So America doesn't have no place to have vetoing power every nation on earth, because they are afraid of losing their privilege of exuberant recycling petrodollars into the New York Stock Exchange to keep every world pegged to their economies. The United States Stock Exchange, the greenback petrodollar. They're willing to starve the whole world into submission with 100% tariffs on every nation on earth if they dare decouple from the American currency as the world reserve currency. These are tyrannical threats that should not be tolerated by all nations on earth. One nation, the United States, cannot submit every other nation on earth to the whims of Washington, D.C. To veto the whole world with impunity. That was not what the United Nations was created for. The United Nations was created to be globally united in democratic, free communities of the international accords. From the laws of the open seas to the League of Nations, now to the United Nations. That's how this global international community was intended to be. Not for one nation to veto the whole nation of all nations on earth with impunity and then not recognize human rights, not recognize human health organizations, to starve out the Palestinians genocidically, to threaten to starve of thirst the whole Iranian population by destroying their drinking waters, desalination plants, to cause mass deaths from Iranians dying of thirst, to not recognize human rights, to not recognize the international courts of law of the United Nations, the Court of Tribunal, the Hague, to not recognize the international laws. America has become a global tyranny. And they need to be checked. And their powers need to be capped and removed from the world stage, meaning blocked. The world needs to let America know, the United States, that they don't have the power they think they have on the global stage. The rest of the nations need to unite and remove America as a world sole superpower. If it means blockading America, if it means closing down their economies, sanctioning them, embargoing them. But to be fair to the United States, just the Assembly needs to ratify this amendment of every nation becoming permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And if America tries to veto it, then ignore America's veto. Ignore it. Don't give them the ability to think that they have power. If America says, oh, we're going to veto this, then say, America, we're not hearing your voice. We refuse your veto. And let every nation on earth sit as permanent members of the United Nations, whether America approves it or not. Ignore America's what power they think they have, what grandeur they think they have. Ignore their wishes. Bypass their veto and allow every nation to be permanent members of the Security Council. Whether America cries like a baby by wanting their cake and eat it too, trying to veto every nation on earth with impunity, ignore these spoiled brats. The politicians in Washington, ignore their juvenile selfishness, egotisms of grandeur. So whether they veto the assembly or not, ignore the veto power of America and allow every nation on earth to sit down as permanent members of the Security Council, whether America wants it or not. It's not their realm or their powers to ignore every nation on earth. So bypass their veto power. Ignore it like their cries falls on deaf ears. When they want to veto the whole world into submission. When they want to economically subvert every nation on earth. With these oil wars that are currently going on in Iran. And the oil blockade on Cuba to threaten to starve people into mass genocide, is a court to be held in the tribunal for those threats. To genocide the Palestinians, to genocide the Iranians with the threat of making them die of starvation, of thirst, by not having source of drinking waters, by starving the Cubans into the dark age, genocidically economical starvation. These are criminal acts that should be accounted for in the International Court of Law. And if America thinks that they can starve the whole world with 100% tariffs just because you got rich 1%ers in America living in the Gilded Age for themselves, with exuberant petrol from OPEC being flooded into the New York Stock Exchange, for they can have exuberant, pompous ass Gilded Ages, while even the American economy are being starved from the leadership of the Republican parties. While the world is being pushed into a stagflation under the Republican parties of the United States for one man's greed of leadership of the Republican presidency. That cannot be tolerated. While he tries to overthrow the midterms and subvert the Democrats like he was trying to do it in 2020 with his fascism of totalitarian despotism. To think that he wants to be thinking that he's more powerful than the United Nations, that he can pillage and plunder the wealth of nations without no theory of morality, and not adhere to the Human Rights Organization and the World Health Organization, as the Palestinians are dying of starvation and lack of medicine, lack of food, for he can take it over and create resorts as the Commonwealth for him and his family. That cannot be tolerated. For him to think that he can duplicate the Gaza Strip and genocidally make the Iranian population go extinct by dying of thirst, the threat that he made to Iran, that cannot be tolerated. 90 million Iranians dying of thirst because he threatened to destroy their source of drinking water. You have seen that America has lost its righteousness of path of global democracy and choose to decide on their own consumption of greed to subvert the rest of the world to their whims with impunity. And that cannot be tolerated. So if America tries to veto the whole world, ignore their veto power. Nations of all nations on earth, and take your rightful place at the table as permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And show America that their word doesn't carry no weight and no respect on the global stage. Submit America to the World Reform Acts of the United Nations, where America cries their crocodile tears of hegemonic rights to veto the whole world into submission with impunity. Because what they're doing is dragging the world down to destruction by holding on to this veto power. So veto power of them thinking that they can bend the wills of all nations to the whims of the politicians in Capitol Hill of Washington, D.C. That cannot be tolerated. So when every nation will sit at the table as permanent members, every nation on earth, the first docket to the accords will be to disarm every nuclear-armed nation on earth. No more nuclear weapons in the name of war. So that will be the first unanimous accord that is voted into international law. This will be the first accord that's voted into international law unanimously. That every nuclear-armed nation will give up their nuclear weapons. Every nuclear-armed nation, without exceptions, 100% giving up their nuclear weapons to save humanity from nuclear destruction. That'll be the number one rule on the docket. The first reform as far as dealing with safeguarding humanity. So unanimously, every nation on earth that is currently nuclear armed or are seeking nuclear weapons, the world international law will prohibit any nation on earth from having nuclear weapons. Every nuclear armed nation will give up 100% of their nuclear weapons to live in a better international community where safeguarded humanity is shepherded without no threat of nuclear annihilation. So for that reason, I want every nation immediately to become permanent members of the United Nations Security Council so we can ratify this amendment into international accords of all nations on earth.